The desert night was colder than usual. A sharp wind swept across the dunes, carrying with it a strange sound, almost like a whisper. It came from beneath the sand, deep, suffocating, desperate. They say the earth itself remembers. And somewhere in the heart of this endless wasteland, it remembers her, the woman they called Queen Dodos. She had once been the jewel of her kingdom. Her beauty was spoken of far beyond the palace walls, hair dark as midnight, eyes that burned like amber in sunlight. But beauty alone had never been her power. She was intelligent, shrewd, and unafraid to rule with a mind sharper than the swords of her generals. But the court feared her. Dodos had not been born into royalty. She rose through cunning and alliance, marrying into the throne after the sudden death of the old king's first wife. In a court dominated by men who whispered in smoke-filled halls, she made her presence impossible to ignore. She handled trade disputes, expanded the kingdom's wealth, and even dared to negotiate with rivals instead of sending armies. But every step forward created enemies in the shadows. Rumors began to spread, soft at first, then louder. Some claimed she was a sorceress, bewitching the king with unnatural charms. Others said she poisoned those who opposed her. None of it could be proven, but in a court where suspicion was deadlier than disease, proof was never needed. The king's sudden illness came like a curse. One evening he was feasting with his court, laughing and drinking wine. By dawn he was pale, trembling and unable to speak. The palace physicians came and went, their remedies useless. Within a week, he was dead. The moment his breath left him, the air in the palace changed. His brothers, uncles, and ambitious cousins closed in on the throne like vultures. And at the center of it all stood Dodos, the young queen who now had no protector. The court whispered in her absence. They whispered in her presence. And before the moon had waxed full again, they declared her guilty. Her crime? Witchcraft, regicide, a threat to the throne itself. They could have executed her swiftly, but death by the sword was too merciful. They wanted her gone, and yet they wanted her suffering to echo through the ages. So they chose an older punishment, one whispered of in the desert for centuries: burial, alive. The night they came for her, she did not cry. They dragged her from her chambers, her silk robes torn, her hair loose and tangled. The soldiers avoided her gaze, as if afraid her eyes still held power. She was bound and taken far from the city, into the black heart of the desert, where even the stars seemed afraid to look down. The hole was already dug, a narrow pit, just deep enough to swallow her whole. She stood at its edge, the wind lifting grains of sand into her face. For a moment the executioners hesitated. Perhaps they feared the stories, the curse that was said to fall upon those who buried the innocent. But then the order was given. They pushed her forward. The thud of her body hitting the bottom was followed by a soft gasp. She was still breathing. The sand came next. Handfuls at first, then shovels, then whole baskets tipped over her. It poured across her feet, her legs, her chest. She tried to speak, not to beg, but to curse them with her last breath. The sand rose to her neck. Her amber eyes locked on the sky one final time, before the desert swallowed her whole. They say the wind changed that night. It carried a strange moan across the dunes, a sound like the low hum of grief. And those who had lifted the shovels would never again sleep peacefully. One by one they died, some from fever, others in accidents that seemed almost deliberate, as if an unseen hand had guided their doom. Generations passed. The kingdom that had condemned her crumbled into dust. But in the villages near the old capital, her name was still spoken in hushed tones. Travelers swore they had seen her figure at dusk, standing on the horizon, her hair moving in a wind no one else could feel. Merchants claimed their caravans were sometimes stopped by sudden sandstorms, as if the desert itself rose up in warning. And the old storytellers, they spoke of a promise, that Queen Dodos had vowed with her final breath that her spirit would remain until her innocence was known. Some say her bones still lie beneath the sand, perfectly preserved, her eyes unclosed. Others believe her body turned to dust, but her soul never left. Archaeologists have searched. They have found fragments of jewelry, shards of pottery bearing her likeness, even a hollow beneath the dunes that could be the pit itself. But no body, no final resting place. Perhaps that is the truest part of her curse, that she can never be found because she has never truly left. The wind still moves strangely in that part of the desert. At night, if you stand alone and close your eyes, you may feel the ground breathe beneath you, as if the sand itself is shifting, remembering. And somewhere below, a voice still whispers, not for mercy, but for justice. The dead don't whisper, they watch.